Hey, good morning. We're doing this one from my house because Friday, as we were doing this for history, um, we had some of your classmates got a little silly, so we had to kind of stop class and address that and this and the other. And I really, as amusing as it was, you probably didn't really want to see all of that. So I decided we'd just redo. Wasn't anything horrible or anything, just waste of time, pretty basically. So anyway, here we go. We were talking about the Baton Death March. There's no homework questions. There's no reading for you. There is a small film or video. I think it's like 3.5, 4 minutes long, something like that. Pretty short. And we just want to hit on some of the highlights. This is a pretty grueling, pretty nasty part of the war. Not that wars, not all of it is grueling or nasty, but this one was one that kind of stands out a little bit more. Uh, the Bataan Death March was when Japanese forces forced 76,000 captured Allied soldiers, Filipinos and Americans, to march about 80 miles across the Bataan Peninsula. And that march took place in April of 1942, of course, during World War II. Bataan is actually can't get it out, peninsula of the um, in the Philippines on the island of Luzon. It is in a peninsula on the Manila Bay across from the capital city of Manila. Um, and after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, Japan quickly began to take over much of Southeast Asia. Uh, and as they approached the Philippines, General Douglas MacArthur moved the U.S. forces from the city of Manila uh, to the Bataan Peninsula, thinking that that would help save the city. Uh, After about 3 months of fierce fighting, the Japanese defeated the U.S. and the Filipino army, uh, and General Edward King Jr. surrendered to the Japanese. Um, there was about 76,000 combined Filipino and American troops. About 12,000 of them was American that surrendered to the Japanese. The Japanese commander knew that he had to do something with his large army that he had captured. So he planned to move them to Camp O'Neill, which was about 80 miles away. When the Japanese they would turn that into a prison camp. The prisoners would walk part of the way, and then the idea was they would ride the train the rest of the way in. The size of the army captured took even the Japanese by surprise. They thought it would only be about 25,000. That's a lot, but when you triple that number, that really threw them for a loop apparently. So they started dividing the army into smaller groups of 100 to 1,000 men, took their weapons, and started the march. Um, Unfortunately, the Japanese did not have food or water for that many people, so they did not give the prisoners food or water for 3 days. And think about marching in that area, Southeast Asia, even in springtime, it's still rather warm. You're already tired from the battles and fighting that you have gone through, and now here you're being forced to march without food or water. So that was pretty grueling for these guys. As the soldiers became weaker and weaker, many of them started to fall behind. Those that fell behind was either beaten or just killed on the spot. Um, Sometimes exhausted prisoners they were just ran over by trucks that was hauling the Japanese troops. Um, Once the prisoners reached the train, they were crammed into the train so tightly that they had to stand for the rest of the journey. It was talking about how even if they passed out or passed away, they couldn't even fall down because it was so crowded that their bodies would just stay upright the entire time. The march lasted for 6 days. No one knew for sure how many soldiers died along the way, but they estimated between 5 and 10,000. Once the soldiers reached the camp, conditions didn't improve much. 1,000 more died at the camp from starvation and disease over the next few years. Once you're taken as a prisoner of war, you're not released. It's not like you're sentenced to so many months or so many years or something like that. You're there until the end of the war, or until your side wins that area and actually releases, sets you free. When you're captured, you're pretty much, if you can't escape, you're pretty much caught. You're there until the end. And there has been cases where, of course, prisoners of war were not released. They were kept even after the war ended. The prisoners that survived were rescued in early 1945 when the Allies retook the Philippines. The Japanese officer in charge of the march, General Homma, was executed for war crimes against humanity. He was actually put on trial, found guilty, and was executed by firing squad. Interesting facts about this march. MacArthur wanted to stay and fight, but was ordered by President Roosevelt to evacuate. That is where he makes the famous "I shall return." As he is leaving the Philippines, he makes a promise to the Filipino people that he will return, and he does later on. Once it's retaken, he does indeed return to the area. When the Japanese first captured the army, they executed about 400 of the Filipino officers who had surrendered. Even though they had surrendered, they were unarmed. They went ahead and executed them anyhow. I'm imagining that was just to send a message to the people, because remember, most of the 76,000 was Filipino. And of course, this is basically their home island, so they're sending them a message real quick, what's going to happen to you if you try anything. The Japanese attempted to cover up the event by having local newspapers report the prisoners were being treated well, but of course the truth about the march comes out when the escaped prisoners tells their story. So it's another one of those horrible ordeals of war. It seems like that's all we have been talking about recently. You jump from World War I to World War II, and then you go, we'll go right into basically after, just a few years after we get out of Korea, we're right back into Vietnam, and but there's a lot of good history too. It's not, everything's not just always fighting. When we get to the 50s here in a few, we're going to talk about the Korean War, unfortunately. We jump from World War II to Korea to Vietnam. Once we get through talking about the Korean War, which we will not go as in depth as we did World War II, we're going to talk about some of the fun stuff that went on in the 50s. And then we'll talk about the 60s rose around. There was some good stuff in the 60s too, the space race, but we will discuss the civil rights movement, which again, a dark spot on our nation. But it is history, and we need to learn all that so that we can try to not repeat the mistakes that we have made in the past, but to build on the good stuff. So that's about it. As I've told the class many times, no, our country is not perfect by any means, but we're still a great country, and if we just all pull together, we're going to be okay. We really are, and I just pray, and I hope you pray too, that our countries will come together, unite again. I pray for our leaders. Like them, don't like them, doesn't matter. The Bible tells us that we need to pray for them, and that's what we need to do. So anyhow, I hope you enjoyed this a little bit. Not real long, about 10 minutes or so. So I will see you later, and take care of yourself. Bye-bye.